in here? Excellent. Good. Right. So yeah, quick overview of grant application stuff. So a few things you want to sort of think about when you're applying for funding. And I think one of the most important things is kind of who are you going to apply to for money? And my thoughts, there was a talk last week at the Anaesthetic Research Society meeting at the college. I don't know if anyone caught that, but kind of different funders will have different funding priorities and different things that they're interested in and so on. So if you can try and make sure that your research aligns with what's your funding, that the people you're applying to are interested in, that's a pretty good starting point, because you don't want to, the BJA, for example, I think is quite sciencey. So they're more likely to fund sort of basic science / translational research than, say, anaesthesia might be. And the people to talk to about that are your supervisors and, you know, people with funding track record, as it were. So that's the kind of first thing to get a view of. How much you're applying for is obviously important. If you want a lot of money and they're only dishing out small amounts of money, then you probably need to go elsewhere, and vice versa. If all of the grants on offer are sort of 50k plus and you just want 5 or 6, then I mean, that's probably a better way around to do it. But you want to be applying for something that sort of matches what you're after. Think about and do some really sort of thought out costing, or make them look like they're well thought out. At least a lot of the issues with, you know, research funding stuff is that you don't really know how much money you're going to need. You don't know how long it's all going to take. You don't know what you're going to be using the money for. But something that you can almost always justify costs for is database support. So like access to RedCap, for example, to store data and in a secure server and so on. Manpower is the other sort of major thing, and we get a lot of, you know, very helpful and sort of, well, I don't think it's pro bono, but, you know, paid for out of the greater sort of source pot by Ramani et al. Support from the HSRC, from Sarah and co at Source, and all of that sort of, you know, backup support that helps drive research is really important. And it's often difficult to get a proper feel for the sort of costings of that. But if you can, you know, you don't have to, it's not like company accounts. You're not having to justify all this super kind of down to the nth degree. But if you can show that you've thought about, I'm going to need 10 hours a week of administrative support, and that's going to cost this much, that's quite a useful thing to be able to put into a grant application, because it looks like you've considered those sorts of things. And obviously, if you can show that you've gone for the cheapest option for something, so, you know, if you need some bit of kit, showing that you've looked in various places and gone for the cheapest one, for example, is obviously reassuring to funders. PPI. So PPI stands for patient and public involvement, and almost all funders like to see evidence of PPI. Sorry, is the banging annoying? It's okay. All right, good. So showing that you have done something involving patients and asking patients about, is my research relevant to you, acceptable to you, all that kind of thing, is really reassuring to funders, because they don't want to spend money on research that is irrelevant to patients, not important to patients, or is going to be too burdensome or you know, just onerous for patients and therefore difficult to recruit to. And without wishing to plug my own work too heavily, something you can use to basically support pretty much any grant application you fancy writing is the top 10 priorities from the James Lind Alliance priority setting partnership. It's getting a bit old now, but there's basically 10 very generic sounding research priorities, all based on, you know, lots of consultation with patients and clinicians about what research is important. So if you can align what you want to do with one or more of the top 10 research priorities from that exercise, I suggest that's an easy way of demonstrating the sort of importance and relevance of your research. Another group at the NIAA who can help massively with PPI stuff is the Patient, Carer and Public Involvement and Engagement Group. So this is a committee of largely lay members of gathered at the college or at the NIAA who review grant applications and protocols for research, and say where they think they could be more patient friendly, bits they don't understand or that need sort of further clarification. Basically provide a lay perspective on what do they think of this research. And it's a really helpful thing to get feedback from them, because even if you haven't had the opportunity to, pilot your research with patients or consult patients about what they think about it all, getting some feedback from the PCPI group at the NIAA is really useful evidence to funders of engagement with patients and the public. And you'd be amazed how many grant applications get submitted, quite big ones, with absolutely no evidence of patient and public involvement whatsoever. And this group is generally a bit underutilized, often gets submissions at the sort of 11th hour saying, oh, can we have feedback on this within a week? Which in the current environment particularly is a bit difficult to provide. But it's absolutely no skin off your noses to submit your protocol to this group and say, can your group look over this and make some suggestions? And we will provide a response saying this is what the group all thought, and you can stick that straight into your grant application, and it's then you've ticked the kind of PPI box. Thinking about risks to patients. So a lot of sort of our work hopefully doesn't involve testing new products or medicines, or which obviously involves a whole load of extra risks and regulatory hurdles. But do think about and write about in your grant applications the fact that you've considered sort of the burden to patients, not collecting a whole load of unnecessary data, not doing hundreds of interviews and surveys, and generally sort of stressing them out at a time which is probably quite a high anxiety period anyway, if they're either in the run up to an operation or on the sort of in the recovery phase. And also sort of consideration of how you will manage patient distress, patient complaints, patients who don't like what they're being asked to do for whatever reason. Again, funders like evidence or demonstrations that you've thought about how you will manage that should it arise. And then the consent process is also something to show that you've kind of had a good think about, and it's obviously important for getting ethical approval. I think the key to a lot of this is having a really good patient information leaflet that describes to your potential participants in very clear and easy terms what's involved, how it emphasizing that it doesn't change the treatment they'll receive, and there's absolutely no pressure on them to consent or participate and so on, but explaining the processes involved, the risks involved if there are any, and what you will do about that, all in totally reassuring terms, obviously, is often helps reassure patients, but also reassures funders, because they will look at this stuff when they're considering applications. And probably the most important thing, I think, in all of this is having a really good plain language summary that you can fit on one side of A4, and show it to your non-medic friends, wives, partners, kids, whatever. And if they read it and say, yeah, that all sounds important and relevant and clearly explained, and if I was a patient turning up in hospital, I would understand what it all involved, then great. And if they say, why are you doing this? What exactly does that mean? What's then adjust it until it is kind of completely lay friendly and idiot proof, because the more clearly and simply you can explain what you're trying to do, I think the more sort of funding friendly it is, and the more, because a lot of these funding applications will be reviewed by people who are not massive experts in your field, and lots of people who are lay reviewers as well. So getting the lay summary right is really, really important. So those are sort of my few thoughts about funding applications for grants.